What if I told you that some of the most dazzling celebrations in human history have been lost to time, not just forgotten, but erased like fragments of a dream you can almost grasp but never quite remember? Picture this: entire cities once came alive with music, fire, and dance under the stars, honoring gods, seasons, and the very fabric of existence. These weren't just parties, they were the heartbeat of civilizations, rituals so powerful they bound communities together across generations. And yet today, their names barely whisper in the wind. How does something so central to human experience simply disappear? That's the mystery we're diving into today. We're setting off on a journey to unearth these lost festivals, piecing together their stories from crumbling scrolls, ancient artwork, and the echoes of traditions that somehow survived. Take Samhain, for example. Long before pumpkins and trick-or-treating, the Celts lit towering bonfires to ward off spirits, marking the thin veil between worlds. Or the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, where initiates danced in secrecy, sworn to never reveal the sacred rites that promised spiritual rebirth. These weren't just events, they were cosmic conversations, humanity's way of making sense of life, death, and everything in between. So why should we care about festivals that vanished centuries ago? Because hidden in their ashes are clues to who we are. The way we celebrate today, the harvest feasts, the solstice gatherings, even the way we mark time carries faint fingerprints of these ancient revelries. By rediscovering them, we're not just digging up the past, we're reclaiming a piece of ourselves. Over the next while, we'll wander through moonlit temples, decode forgotten symbols, and meet the people who kept these flames alive against all odds. This isn't just history, it's a mirror, and by the end, you might just see your own reflection staring back. Imagine a world where time wasn't measured by clocks or calendars, but by the rhythms of the earth itself, where the turning of seasons wasn't just weather, but a sacred conversation between people and the cosmos. That's the world ancient festivals sprang from. They weren't mere distractions, they were the glue holding societies together, the living pulse of cultures that saw no separation between the spiritual and the everyday. Take Saturnalia, Rome's riotous winter festival where slaves dined with masters and rules were tossed aside like old laurel wreaths. For a few days, the rigid order of empire melted into laughter and feasting, a temporary chaos that somehow reinforced the social fabric. Or consider Egypt's Opet Festival, where the statues of gods traveled down the Nile in golden barges, rekindling the land's fertility and the pharaoh's divine right to rule. These weren't just pageants, they were acts of cosmic maintenance, rituals that ensured the sun would rise and crops would grow. But here's the twist: when these festivals faded, it wasn't because people grew bored. Their disappearance often mirrored seismic shifts in power, belief, or survival. The rise of Christianity didn't just replace pagan gods, it rewrote the very calendar, folding old solstice celebrations into Christmas and Easter. Conquests erased traditions, like the Spanish suppression of indigenous festivals in the Americas, where sacred dances were forced underground only to resurface centuries later in disguised forms. Yet traces linger in ways we might not expect. Ever wonder why we hide eggs in spring or light candles in December? Those aren't just quaint customs, they're echoes of ancient rites, fragments of festivals that refused to die. What's startling is how these celebrations reveal the priorities of their time. A harvest festival wasn't just about gratitude, it was a communal insurance policy, ensuring everyone shared in plenty before the lean months. A solstice ceremony wasn't just marking the sun's turn, it was a collective sigh of relief that darkness would retreat again. These events tied people to each other and to the land in ways modern life often misses. When we study them, we're not just cataloging forgotten parties, we're decoding how humans have always sought meaning through shared joy, through reverence for forces beyond control, through rituals that said, "We are here together in this vast and mysterious world." Deep in the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, as the Tigris and Euphrates rivers swelled with the promise of spring, an extraordinary spectacle unfolded. The festival of Zagmuk wasn't just a celebration, it was a dramatic reenactment of the universe itself. For 12 dizzying days, the Babylonians believed the fate of the world hung in the balance as their chief god Marduk battled the monstrous goddess Tiamat, the embodiment of primordial chaos. This wasn't myth retold around a fire, it was myth brought to life. The king, the living representative of Marduk, would undergo a ritual humiliation, stripped of his royal regalia and symbolically imprisoned. Then, in a thunderous climax, he'd be rescued by priests, his restoration mirroring Marduk's victory and the renewal of cosmic order. What's fascinating is how this ancient ritual echoes through time. The Jewish festival of Purim, with its themes of reversal and deliverance, carries whispers of Zagmuck's DNA. Even our modern habit of New Year's resolutions, those promises to conquer personal chaos, might trace back to Babylon's dusty temple courtyards. But Zagmuck's brilliance lay in its layered meanings. On one level, it was political theater, reinforcing the king's divine mandate. On another, it was agricultural necessity, timed to the flooding rivers that nourished crops. Most profoundly, it was existential reassurance, a yearly reminder that order would always triumph, even when darkness seemed overwhelming. Yet by the time Alexander the Great marched into Babylon, Zagmuck's fires had dimmed. Empires rise and fall, and with them their rituals. As Babylonian power waned, so did the urgency of Marduk's story. New conquerors brought new gods, new calendars, new ways of marking time. But here's the twist: Zagmuck never truly vanished. Its essence, that human longing to ritually defeat chaos, migrated, shape-shifting into other traditions. Like a river splitting into delta streams, its themes of renewal and rebirth found new channels, proving that some celebrations are too powerful to ever fully disappear. The chill of autumn wasn't just a change in weather for the ancient Celts, it was a cosmic event. As the last crops were gathered and the land grew bare, they believed the boundary between our world and the other world grew dangerously thin. This was Samhane, a night when spirits, fairies, and the restless dead could slip through the cracks. But here's what most don't realize: those flickering jack-o'-lanterns we carve today. They started as turnips hollowed out to hold glowing embers from sacred bonfires, meant to ward off wandering spirits, and the custom of dressing in costumes. Originally, it wasn't about candy. People disguised themselves as monsters or animals to confuse vengeful ghosts, blending into the supernatural chaos. The heart of Samhane wasn't fear, though it was connection. Families would set extra places at the dinner table, offering food to ancestors who might visit. Druids performed divination rituals, reading the future in apple peels tossed over shoulders or the patterns of nuts cracking in the fire. Even the bonfires themselves were communal magic. Cattle were driven between twin flames for protection, and every household took embers home to relight their hearths, binding the community together under the same sacred light. Then came Christianity, and with it, a deliberate rewriting of the calendar. Pope Gregory III moved All Saints' Day to November 1st, layering saints over spirits, prayers over offerings. But Samhane refused to fade. Souling, where the poor went door to door singing for soul cakes in exchange for prayers, quietly preserved the old tradition of roaming the night. The carved turnips became pumpkins in America, but the light inside still whispers of those ancient fires. and when children shout trick or treat, they're unknowingly echoing a far older bargain offerings given to appease the unseen. The genius of Samhain's survival lies in its adaptability. Its rituals didn't vanish, they evolved, hiding in the shadows of new traditions, ever bobbed for apples. That was once a marriage divination game. Seen a black cat cross your path, the Celts believed they were shape-shifted spirits. Even our love of ghost stories around Halloween ties back to the belief that the dead walked closest on that one night. Samhain proves something profound. The oldest festivals don't die. They simply change costumes, waiting for us to recognize them. Hidden among the olive groves near Athens, the sanctuary of Eleusis held secrets so powerful that even death lost its sting for those who witnessed them. The Eleusinian mysteries weren't just another festival, they were an immersive journey into the underworld and back, a 9-day initiation that promised something extraordinary, the abolition of fear. Imagine walking the sacred way from Athens to Eleusis, fasting, chanting, and finally standing in the darkened Telesterion as priests revealed visions of the afterlife. The climax, drinking the kykeon, a sacred barley potion that may have induced altered states, letting initiates see what no words could describe. At the heart of it all was the myth of Demeter and Persephone, a story of loss, despair, and ultimate reunion. But here's what made Eleusis unique. Participants didn't just hear the tale, they lived it. The rituals reenacted Persephone's descent into Hades and her return, mirroring the cycle of crops and the human soul's resilience. This wasn't theater, it was a visceral experience designed to shatter one's understanding of mortality. Small wonder that everyone from Plato to Roman emperors underwent initiation, despite a vow of silence punishable by death. The mysteries offered what no philosophy could, first-hand proof that life continued beyond the grave. Yet their true genius lay in accessibility. Unlike exclusive cults, Eleusis welcomed all, enslaved people, women, even foreigners, as long as they spoke Greek and hadn't committed murder. In a stratified society, this was radical. For initiates, the shared secrecy created bonds stronger than social class. When Christianity rose, Emperor Theodosius didn't just ban the rites, he burned the sanctuary, fearing their enduring power. But traces linger. Some scholars see Eleusis' legacy in the Eucharist's sacred meal or in modern psychedelic therapy, where substances like psilocybin are used to treat death anxiety. The most haunting question isn't what the kykeon contained, it's why these rites resonated so deeply across centuries, perhaps because they addressed a fear older than civilization itself, the terror of oblivion. By ritually confronting death, initiates didn't just witness a mystery, they became it, carrying its light back into the world like Demeter's torches in the night. That's why, even now, the silence of Eleusis speaks. The mysteries remind us that some truths aren't taught but experienced, and that the most profound festivals aren't about spectacle, but the quiet transformation of the human soul. Rome's Saturnalia wasn't just a festival, it was a controlled explosion of chaos that somehow kept the empire intact. For 7 days in December, the rigid hierarchies of Roman society flipped upside down. Masters served meals to their enslaved people, citizens gambled openly in the streets, and even the emperor was fair game for jokes. The streets of Rome transformed into a carnival of laughter and wine, where the usual rules didn't apply. At its heart, this wasn't mere debauchery. It was a brilliant social pressure valve. By allowing temporary disorder, Saturnalia reinforced the stability of the system the rest of the year. The origins of this madness trace back to the Temple of Saturn, where priests loosened the woolen bonds around the god statue, symbolizing liberation. From there, the spirit of rebellion spread like wildfire. people exchanged small clay dolls called sigillaria, early ancestors of holiday gifts, and crowned themselves with festive wreaths. Candles flickered everywhere, not just for light, but as symbols of the returning sun after the winter solstice. These weren't arbitrary traditions. The candles mirrored the hope of longer days ahead, while the role reversals echoed Saturn's mythical golden age, a time before social classes existed. What's remarkable is how Saturnalia's DNA survives in modern celebrations. The tradition of decking halls with evergreen wreaths straight from Roman doorways. The custom of gift-giving, a direct descendant of sigillaria exchanges. Even the timing of Christmas owes a debt to Saturnalia, as early Christians strategically placed their holiday in December to co-opt the popular pagan festival. But something vital was lost in that transition. Where Saturnalia reveled in temporary anarchy, Christmas became more subdued, its rebellious edges smoothed by religious solemnity. The festival's decline began when Christianity gained imperial favor. Emperors like Constantine kept some Saturnalia customs alive, but over time, the wild heart of the festival was tamed. Yet traces of its spirit persist in unexpected places. Ever noticed how office holiday parties often feature the quietest employee crowned as king for a day? That's Saturnalia's legacy, the urge to momentarily upend the social order, to laugh in the face of authority. It never really left us. Perhaps that's why Saturnalia still fascinates. In a world of relentless structure, the idea of sanctioned chaos, of a time when everyone could breathe freely, feels less like ancient history and more like a prescription for modern life. The Nile wasn't just a river to the ancient Egyptians. It was a living god, its annual floods a divine embrace that turned sand into gold. And no festival captured that sacred relationship like the Opet Festival, when the statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu embarked on a journey so lavish, it blurred the line between heaven and earth. Picture this, gilded barges gleaming under the sun, their sails billowing as they carried the gods from Karnak to Luxor, accompanied by priests in leopard skins, dancers shaking sistrums, and crowds lining the banks with offerings. This wasn't just a parade, it was a cosmic marriage ceremony, a ritual so potent it renewed the very fabric of Egypt. At its heart, Opet celebrated the union of Amun and Mut, a divine coupling that mirrored the Nile's fertile floods. But the festival's true brilliance lay in its political alchemy. As the statues traveled, the pharaoh would enter the Holy of Holies, emerging hours later, reborn with his divinity reaffirmed. In that moment, the people didn't just see a ruler, they witnessed a living god, his power tied to the land's survival. The timing was no accident either. Opet coincided with the Nile's inundation, weaving together spiritual renewal and agricultural necessity. When the waters rose, so did the people's faith in the invisible threads binding pharaoh, gods, and harvest. What's astonishing is how Opet's grandeur hid layers of intimacy. Though the public saw golden processions, the most sacred rites happened behind temple walls. Recent discoveries at Luxor reveal hidden chambers where the god statues were ritually bathed, dressed, and fed acts of devotion meant to sustain their cosmic energy. Even the festival's name whispers secrets. Opet likely refers to the inner sanctuary of Karnak, the harem of Amun, where the god's most mysterious transformations occurred. Yet by the time Rome turned Egypt into a breadbasket, Opet's barges had long stopped sailing. The fall of the new kingdom scattered its rites like papyrus in the wind. But echoes linger. Modern Luxor still hosts a replica Opet procession, complete with costumed performers, and replica barks a poignant attempt to grasp the threads of a lost world. And in temple reliefs, the festival's vibrancy survives. Look closely at Karnak's walls, and you'll see musicians, acrobats, and the pharaoh himself standing waist-deep in flowers, offering wine to the gods. The most tantalizing question isn't what we know about Opet, it's what remains hidden. Recent infrared scans of Luxor's courtyards suggest undiscovered pits filled with ceremonial artifacts, perhaps even the remnants of the festival's sacred beer brewed from Nile water. Every clue hints that Opet wasn't just a spectacle, it was a living dialogue between earth and heaven, a reminder that in ancient Egypt, the divine wasn't distant, it sailed among the people, close enough to touch. Beltane wasn't just a festival, it was a roaring declaration that life had returned in full force. While Samhane honored the descent into winter's darkness, Beltane blazed with the opposite energy, marking the moment when the Celtic world erupted into color and warmth. Imagine hillsides dotted with bonfires so large they could be seen for miles, their smoke carrying prayers for fertile fields and healthy livestock. This was no quiet observance. It was a sensory overload of drumbeats, flower crowns, and the intoxicating scent of hawthorn blossoms, believed to be the doorway between worlds. The heart of Beltane pulsed with fire. Couples leaped over flames not just for luck, but as a test of commitment. Those who cleared the blaze together were thought to share a bond for the year ahead. Cattle, the lifeblood of Celtic communities, were driven between twin bonfires to purify them before summer grazing. Even the embers held power. Families carried them home to relight hearths, weaving protection into every household. But Beltane's magic wasn't just practical, it was deeply symbolic. The maypole, with its rainbow ribbons twining around a phallic central shaft, wasn't merely decoration. It was a ritual act, the intertwining dancers mimicking the sacred union of earth and sky that would ensure abundance. Christian authorities saw Beltane's unbridled joy as dangerous. By the Middle Ages, maypoles were banned and the festival was recast as the tamer May Day. Yet like Samhane, Beltane refused to vanish entirely. In Ireland, people still light hilltop fires on May Eve. In Scotland, the tradition of beating the bounds, walking the boundaries of farms with torches harks back to ancient protection rites, even the innocuous childhood game of weaving flower chains. That's a remnant of Beltane's garlands, once believed to hold protective magic. What's startling is how Beltane's ethos feels urgently modern. In an age of climate crisis and disconnection from nature, its emphasis on communal stewardship of the land resonates deeply. Modern eco-villages have revived Beltane-style rituals, planting trees instead of maypoles and using the festival to renew pledges to sustainable living. There's a reason for this revival. Beltane wasn't just about asking the earth to provide, it was about recognizing humanity's role in the cycle. The bonfires weren't just for celebration, they were a promise to tend the fields that would feed the community. The dances weren't just entertainment, they were acts of gratitude. Perhaps Beltane's greatest lesson is that joy can be sacred. Unlike somber religious ceremonies, this festival embraced laughter, flirtation, and the sheer pleasure of being alive in a world reborn. Its suppression wasn't just about stamping out paganism, it was about controlling the untamed parts of human spirit that Beltane celebrated. Yet in tiny Welsh villages where May Day revelers still dance with flower-stuffed baskets, or in Edinburgh's modern Beltane Fire Festival with its drummers and body paint, that spirit flickers on. It whispers that some connections to each other, to the land, to the primal thrill of flames under an open sky, are too vital to ever fully extinguish. At the height of Athenian democracy, when philosophy and politics were dominated by men, one festival turned the social order upside down. The Thesmophoria wasn't just a celebration, it was a sacred rebellion. For 3 days each autumn, women from Athens' most respected families abandoned their homes and gathered on the Phoenix Hill, the very spot where men debated laws and waged wars. Here, under the open sky, they enacted rituals so secret that even today, historians can only piece together fragments of what transpired. What we do know is this: the festival honored Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and her daughter Persephone, but its true power lay in what it represented, a rare, sanctioned space where women held absolute authority. The preparations alone were extraordinary. Weeks before the festival, women carried piglets into underground chambers called megara, where the animals decayed alongside pine cones and baked dough, symbols of death and rebirth. When the Thesmophoria arrived, these offerings were retrieved and mixed with seeds to bless the next planting, but the rituals went far beyond agriculture. Participants fasted on pomegranate seeds, mirroring Persephone's underworld ordeal, then feasted to celebrate her return. They swapped filthy jokes, a nod to the myth of Bobo, whose crude humor made Demeter laugh during her grief. Most strikingly, they reenacted Demeter's search for her daughter, torches cutting through the night as they wandered the hillside. This wasn't passive worship, it was embodied storytelling, a way for women to connect their struggles to the divine. The festival's exclusivity wasn't just tradition, it was defiance. Any man who stumbled upon the rites risked brutal punishment, echoing the fate of the mythical intruder Battus, turned to stone for spying on Demeter's mysteries. Yet within this female sanctuary, hierarchies dissolved. Wealthy matrons and enslaved women worked side by side, their shared labor transcending class. For a brief moment, the rigid boundaries of Athenian life softened. So why did such a powerful tradition fade? As Greece fell under Roman influence, the Thesmophoria's significance waned alongside the city-state's independence. But its decline also reflects a broader cultural shift, the gradual erosion of women's public religious roles. Later historians, mostly male, dismissed it as superstition or fertility magic, obscuring its complexity. Modern archaeology tells a different story. Excavations at the Thesmophoria sites reveal intricate votive offerings, terracotta figurines of women kneading bread, holding torches, or cradling piglets, proof that participants saw themselves as active partners in sustaining the world's balance. The festival's legacy lingers in unexpected places. In rural Greece, some women still plant Demeter's grains in secret gardens, whispering old prayers. Feminist scholars point to the Thesmophoria as evidence that ancient women weren't merely confined to the home. They were keepers of rituals vital to society's survival. Perhaps its greatest lesson is timeless. When women claim space to honor their experiences collectively, they don't just celebrate divinity, they embody it. In a world still grappling with gender equity, that's a flame worth tending. At the first blush of spring, when Athenian vines trembled with new growth, the city surrendered itself to a festival unlike any other. And the Styria wasn't just about Dionysus and his intoxicating gift of wine. It was a 3-day dance between the living and the dead, where every sip carried the weight of the underworld. Picture this: families gathered around massive clay jars, the previous year's wine opened for the first time, its fermentation seen as nothing short of miraculous. But this was no ordinary toast. As the first drops touched lips, participants whispered a chilling phrase: "Out of the doors, spirits, and the Styria is over." A reminder that the boundary between worlds had grown perilously thin. The festival's genius lay in its layers. Day 1, Pythoia, honored the wine's transformation, a celebration of life's sweetness. Yet even here, darkness lurked. The jars were adorned with wreaths of spring flowers, but also with lead curse tablets, acknowledging wine's dual power to heal or harm. Day 2, Chais, turned the city into a surreal carnival. Citizens dressed as mythical figures, drinking from individual cups rather than shared vessels, a rare act of isolation in communal Greek society. Some scholars believe this mirrored the myth of the deluge, where survivors drank alone to avoid contamination. but the most haunting ritual belonged to the Basilina, the wife of Athens' Archon, who entered a symbolic marriage with Dionysus in a secret ceremony. Was this fertility rite or ghostly pact? The line blurred deliciously. By day 3, Chitroi, the mood shifted solemnly. Pots of cooked grains were offered to Hermes Psychopompos, guide of the dead, with none of the leftovers consumed, a meal meant solely for spirits. This wasn't just ancestor veneration, it was a civic exorcism. The Athenians weren't merely honoring the dead, they were negotiating with them, saying, "We remember you, but now you must return to your realm." What's startling is how Anthesteria's raw honesty about mortality feels jarringly contemporary. Modern cultures often silo joy and grief. Think of our raucous New Year's Eve parties versus somber graveyard visits. But the Athenians wrapped them together, recognizing that life's sweetness gains depth when paired with awareness of its brevity. Even their drinking games carried purpose. The child's race with wine-filled cups during chais wasn't just play. It was initiation, teaching the young that Dionysus' gift required respect. The festival's decline came as Christianity reframed death as either salvation or damnation, stripping away its nuanced conversational role in daily life. Yet traces endure. The Greek custom of offering koliva, sweet wheat dishes at memorials, echoes Chitroi's grain offerings, and in Sicily's vibrant Day of the Dead celebrations, where sweets shaped like bones are devoured amid laughter, Anthesteria's spirit flickers on. Perhaps its greatest lesson isn't about the dead at all, but about the living, how to hold joy and loss in the same cup, drinking deeply of both without flinching. Lupercalia wasn't just Rome's wildest festival, it was a collision of sacred absurdity and raw primal energy that would shock even the most liberal modern revelers. Every February 15th, the city's elite young men, clad only in strips of freshly slaughtered goat hide, sprinted through the streets, laughing as they lashed women with the same bloody thongs. Far from protest, women lined up eagerly for these strikes, believing the ritual ensured fertility and easy childbirth. But here's what most history books miss: this wasn't mere superstition. The goat hides held deep symbolism. The Luperci priests sacrificed the animals at the cave where Romulus and Remus were famously nursed by a she-wolf, tying the ritual to Rome's very origin myth. The blood represented both purification and life force, a messy, visceral reminder of nature's cycles. The festival's second act was even more surprising. Names were drawn from a jar, randomly pairing men and women as temporary companions, sometimes leading to lasting matches. This lottery wasn't just ancient speed dating. It echoed the festival's roots in pastoral society, where communal bonds were vital for survival. Yet as Rome urbanized, Lupercalia's raucousness became a problem. Conservative senators winced at the nudity, while early Christians recoiled at its pagan excess. The festival's eventual cancellation by Pope Gelasius in the 5th century wasn't just religious suppression, it was a rebranding. Gelasius replaced it with the Feast of Saint Valentine, softening the wild fertility rites into chaste expressions of affection. But Lupercalia never fully disappeared. Traces linger in Valentine's Day's pairing traditions, and some scholars argue the festival's spirit survives in Carnival's pre-Lenten abandon. Even the goat symbolism persists unexpectedly. Medieval love charms often included goat hair, and the phrase, "wearing your heart on your sleeve," might originate from Lupercalia's skin-clad revelers. What's fascinating is how this bizarre ritual reveals humanity's timeless urge to channel chaos into order. The same blood-stained thongs that promoted fertility also warded off evil spirits, embodying the dual nature of purification. Sometimes you have to embrace life's messiness to truly cleanse. The real mystery isn't why Lupercalia faded, it's how its energy kept resurfacing. In Renaissance Florence, artists revived Greco-Roman themes in paintings of cupids and nymphs, sanitizing the old wildness into decorous romance. Modern fertility clinics might not use goat hides, but the desperate hope behind their treatments isn't so different from those Roman women baring their palms for a sacred lash. Perhaps what unsettled the church wasn't Lupercalia's paganism, but its honesty about human desires, the unapologetic celebration of bodies, chants, and the uncontrollable forces that bind us together. In the end, the festival's greatest legacy might be this: some impulses are too fundamental to ever be fully civilized. They just change costumes, waiting for their moment to run naked through history once more. Panathenaea wasn't just Athens' biggest party, it was the beating heart of what made the city extraordinary. Imagine the Acropolis gleaming under the summer sun, its marble steps crowded with citizens, foreigners, and enslaved people alike, all gathered to honor Athena, the goddess who gave the city its name and its soul. Every 4 years, the usual Panathenaic procession swelled into something truly spectacular, transforming Athens into a living theater of civic pride. Athletes from across the Greek world competed not for gold medals but for amphorae filled with sacred olive oil, a nod to Athena's gift of the olive tree. Poets recited verses that would echo through history, while artisans showcased works so exquisite they'd inspire artists for millennia. But the climax: a woven masterpiece carried like a sail through the streets, the peplos, a saffron-dyed robe embroidered with scenes of Athena's victory over the giants, destined to dress her ancient wooden statue in the Parthenon. This wasn't just ritual, it was political storytelling at its finest. The procession's route from the Dipylon Gate through the Agora to the Acropolis was a carefully staged journey through Athens' identity. As participants climbed the sacred hill, they passed monuments celebrating democratic victories and mythical triumphs, reinforcing the message that Athena's favor made Athens invincible. Even the peplos held hidden meanings, woven by aristocratic girls and priestesses. Its imagery often subtly celebrated recent military successes, turning divine homage into propaganda. The festival's inclusivity was equally calculated. Metic's foreign residents carried trays of offerings, while enslaved people hauled the sacrificial bulls, their participation a reminder that even Athens' subjugated members had a role in its glory. What's startling is how Panathenaea's decline mirrored Athens' own unraveling. After the city fell to Rome in the 2nd century BCE, the festival limped on, but its grandeur faded alongside Athenian independence. The peplos became simpler, the games less prestigious. Yet like olive shoots sprouting from a burned grove, fragments survived. The modern Olympics' blend of sport and art owes a clear debt to Panathenaea's model. Even the marathon's tradition of finishing in a stadium echoes the festival's torch races, where runners passed flames from the altar of Eros to the Acropolis. The real question isn't whether we could revive such celebrations, it's whether we've already begun to. Think of cities that pause for giant parades, whether Mardi Gras in New Orleans or Dia de los Muertos in Mexico City. These aren't just parties, they're acts of collective identity where art, history, and community intertwine. What made Panathenaea unique was its sacred audacity, the belief that a city's soul could be stitched into a robe, celebrated in a foot race, or captured in a hymn. In an age of fragmented attention and polarized politics, that's a vision worth dusting off. Not to worship Athena, perhaps, but to remember how ritual can bind a people together, turning stone streets into stories and citizens into torchbearers of something greater than themselves. When the first petals of spring unfurled in ancient Rome, the city erupted in a celebration so vibrant it made even Saturnalia seem tame. The Floralia wasn't just a festival, it was a riot of color, scent, and unapologetic joy dedicated to Flora, the goddess who painted the world with blossoms. For 6 days starting in late April, the streets transformed into a living garden. Citizens tossed chickpeas and lupine beans into crowds, not as mere snacks but as fertility charms, their round shapes echoing life's endless cycle. Actors took to makeshift stages, performing raucous comedies where societal norms were gleefully appended, while dancers swirled in garments sewn with fresh flowers that scattered petals with every turn. But the true spectacle came at night, when torchlight parades illuminated the city, and wild hares, symbols of prolific reproduction, were released into the crowds, their darting movements mirroring the unpredictable energy of spring itself. What made Floralia extraordinary wasn't just its revelry, but its radical embrace of nature's untamed side. Unlike stiff religious ceremonies, this festival celebrated decay as much as growth, the withering petals mixed with new blooms, a reminder that beauty and transience were inseparable. Prostitutes, often marginalized in Roman society, were welcomed as honored participants, their presence acknowledging fertility's raw, primal power. Even the goddess Flora herself was no demure nymph. Ancient hymns depict her as a deity who laughed loudly, drank deeply, and once turned a scorned lover into a flower, not out of pity but poetic justice. This was no sanitized tribute to spring. It was a full-bodied roar of gratitude for life's messy, exuberant abundance. Christian authorities later recoiled at Floralia's unrestrained sensuality. By the 5th century, attempts to replace it with solemn prayers to the Virgin Mary failed to capture its essence. Yet like a stubborn wildflower pushing through cracks in stone, fragments survived. May Day's flower crowns and maypole dances owe more to Floralia than most realize. Medieval Europe simply swapped Roman beans for hawthorn blossoms but kept the spirit of communal joy. Even the tradition of bringing in the May, where villagers gathered dawn flowers to decorate homes, echoes Floralia's processions. Reimagining Floralia today isn't about resurrecting ancient rites verbatim. It's about reclaiming its fearless celebration of nature's cycles in an age of climate anxiety. Picture modern city squares transformed into temporary meadows, where office workers scatter native wildflower seeds instead of beans. Imagine theater troupes performing not just for entertainment, but to confront our fraught relationship with the environment, comedies where plastic waste morphs into blossoming vines, or dances that mimic the migration patterns of endangered pollinators. Floralia's true legacy isn't in the specifics of its rituals, but in its reminder that reverence for nature need not be somber. It can be loud, messy, and deliriously alive, a festival where the sacred wears a crown of dandelions and the divine smells like upturned earth after rain. There's something almost supernatural about standing in the shadow of El Castillo at Chichen Itza during the spring equinox. As the sun dips toward the horizon, the pyramid-stepped edges cast a series of triangular shadows that slither down the northern staircase, merging with carved stone serpent heads at the base to create the illusion of a giant feathered snake descending from the heavens. This wasn't just clever architecture, it was the Maya's way of bending light and stone into a living calendar. Every year, this spectacle marked the Kayatan endings, pivotal moments in the Maya's long count calendar when time itself seemed to reset. Farmers looked to the serpent's descent as a signal to prepare their fields, while rulers used the celestial alignment to reinforce their divine mandate, proving they commanded not just people, but the cosmos itself. What's often overlooked is how these festivals wove together science and theater. The pyramid's 91 steps on each side, plus the shared platform at the top, total 365, a deliberate echo of the solar year. But the Maya didn't stop there. Recent LiDAR scans reveal hidden acoustic chambers beneath the plaza that amplified ritual chants, making voices seem to emanate from the earth itself. Imagine the impact as the shadow serpent spoke. Priests' voices boomed from below, creating a multisensory experience that blurred the line between astronomy and epiphany. This wasn't mere pageantry. It was a masterclass in psychological architecture designed to make the abstract tangible, to turn celestial mechanics into something you could feel in your bones. The Spanish conquest didn't just silence these rituals, it tried to erase their very logic. Missionaries dismissed the serpent shadow as demonic trickery, unaware they were condemning one of history's most precise solar observatories. Yet, like the equinox light itself, the tradition refused to vanish completely. Modern Maya communities still mark the day with offerings of corn and cocoa, and the site's caretakers have preserved a startling detail. The serpent illusion only works because the pyramid's original plaster coating, now worn away by centuries, was subtly tinted to enhance the shadow's contrast. Even their paint was engineered for celestial drama. The real question isn't just how the Maya achieved this, it's what other sky-bound marvels we've lost. Did Teotihuacan's Pyramid of the Sun once channel equinox light in ways we can't yet decipher? Were Peru's Nazca lines, those vast desert glyphs, aligned to celestial events that modern telescopes might rediscover? The Maya remind us that ancient festivals weren't just about marking time, but about marrying earth to sky in ways that made both feel alive. When we watch that shadow snake slither down El Castillo today, we're not just seeing an old ritual. We're glimpsing a world where heaven and earth were partners in a dance, and humanity wasn't just an observer, but a participant in the universe's grand design. Under the springtime Athenian sky, the air hummed with anticipation as thousands gathered on the slopes of the Acropolis. This wasn't just entertainment, it was the great Dionysia, where theater became a bridge between mortals and gods. For 5 days each March, the city transformed into a living stage, its dramas far more than stories. They were sacred offerings to Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and transformation. Picture the scene, actors wearing masks carved from wood and linen, their exaggerated expressions visible even to spectators in the very back rows. The chorus, dressed in elaborate costumes, moved as one entity, their songs rising like incense to the heavens. But here's what most miss. Every performance began with a sacrifice. A pig's blood was spilled on the altar, its scent mingling with the sweat of actors and the dust of the theater, a visceral reminder that this art was born from ritual. The plays themselves were anything but frivolous. When Sophocles unveiled Antigone or Euripides staged the Bacchae, they weren't just spinning tales, they were holding up a mirror to Athens' soul. These tragedies wrestled with divine justice, civic duty, and the limits of human pride, while the raunchy comedies of Aristophanes skewered politicians and philosophers with fearless satire. Yet even the bawdiest jokes carried weight. The festival's central paradox was its duality. It celebrated the god of wine and madness through meticulously structured art. Dionysus, after all, was the deity who dissolved boundaries between man and beast, order and chaos. The theater captured that tension, using rigid poetic meters and choreography to channel themes of upheaval and revelation. What's often overlooked is how deeply democratic this ritual was. The front rows weren't reserved for elites but for priests and war orphans, while the poorest citizens received attendance subsidies from the state. Judges were selected by lottery, their verdicts swayed not by patronage but by the crowd's roaring approval. This was art as civic sacrament, where the act of watching became a collective exercise in moral reflection. When the chorus in Oedipus Rex warned of hubris, or when Lysistrata's women withheld sex to end war, the entire polis grappled with these questions together. Fast forward to modern times and the sacred thread has frayed. Broadway lights and Oscar speeches may dazzle, but when was the last time a play felt like a spiritual event? Contemporary theatre often prioritizes individual expression over communal catharsis, and the closest we come to ritual might be the hushed silence before a curtain rises. Yet glimmers of the Dionysian spirit survive in immersive productions where audiences become participants, or in protest performances that blur the line between art and activism. Even the tradition of standing ovations faintly echoes the ancient practice of judging plays by audience acclamation. The great Dionysia's true legacy isn't just in scripts or stages, but in its radical vision of art's purpose. It asked theatre to do more than distract or delight. It demanded that stories shake us to our core, then stitch us back together as a community. Perhaps that's why, millennia later, the masks of comedy and tragedy still symbolize drama. They're not just symbols of genre, but reminders of theater's oldest calling, to make us laugh, weep, and collectively reckon with what it means to be human. The long winter nights of Scandinavia weren't just endured, they were celebrated with a firelit defiance that would make even modern Hig enthusiasts pause. Yule wasn't merely a Norse festival. It was a 12-day rebellion against darkness, where every flickering torch and evergreen bough whispered a promise: the sun would return. Imagine the scene inside a Viking longhouse, the air thick with the scent of roasting boar and mulled ale, as families hung fir branches not for decoration, but as shelter for ancestral spirits seeking warmth. Outside, the crunch of snow underfoot might signal not just neighbors arriving, but the spectral riders of the wild hunt, Odin's ghostly procession said to sweep across the sky, its passing both awe-inspiring and ominous. This wasn't just holiday cheer, it was a cosmic drama played out in hearthside rituals. At the heart of Yule lay the burning of the Yule log, a tradition far more potent than its modern, cake-ified counterpart. The Norse didn't just light a log, they selected an entire tree, carving runes for protection before setting it ablaze. Its slow burn symbolized the sun's endurance, with families carefully saving a charred remnant to kindle next year's fire, a literal passing of the light. The feast table groaned with symbolic dishes, circular breads mimicking the solar disk, pork as tribute to Freya's golden boar Gullinbursti, and fermented drinks shared from communal horns to bind the community together. Even the act of storytelling took on sacred weight, as skaldic poets spun tales of gods and heroes, their words weaving a spell against the encroaching cold. Christian missionaries arriving in the north faced a dilemma: how to overwrite a festival so deeply rooted in the land's rhythms. Their solution wasn't suppression, but syncretism. Yule's timing aligned neatly with Christmas. Its evergreen boughs became church decorations, and Odin's wild hunt subtly morphed into Santa's sleigh ride. The 12 days of Yule, they're still there in our 12 days of Christmas. Yet something fundamental was lost in translation, the raw acknowledgement of winter as both threat and teacher. For the Norse, Yule wasn't just about waiting for spring. It was about finding joy and meaning in the waiting itself. Reconnecting with Yule's spirit today doesn't require abandoning Christmas or donning a horned helmet. It might mean embracing the slowness of winter instead of rushing through it with shopping sprees. It could look like lighting candles with intention, not just for ambience but as tiny acts of defiance against the dark. The Norse didn't fear the cold, they made it sacred, turning their longest nights into a celebration of resilience. In an age of climate anxiety and perpetual busyness, that's a gift worth unwrapping. The permission to sit by the fire, share stories, and remember that even the deepest winter holds the seeds of light. The Vestalia began in hushed reverence as Rome's matrons slipped off their sandals and walked barefoot across sun-warmed stones toward the temple of Vesta. For 8 days each June, the city's hearth fires became sacred, their flickering flames tended with rituals passed down through generations. At the heart of it all stood the Vestal Virgins, the only priestesses in Rome who guarded Vesta's eternal fire, a living symbol of the empire's stability. But the festival's true magic unfolded in ordinary homes, where women ground spelt into flour using ancient stone mills, shaping the dough into sacred loaves called mola salsa. These weren't just offerings, they were edible prayers, baked in communal ovens and shared to bless every household's meals for the coming year. What made Vestalia extraordinary was its intimacy. Unlike Rome's grand public spectacles, this festival turned daily acts baking, cleaning, kindling fires into holy rites. The Vestals themselves, usually sequestered in their atrium, opened the inner sanctum to matrons who brought simple gifts of salt and oil. For those few days, the boundary between divine and domestic dissolved. Even the milling of grain held deeper meaning. The coarse stones mirrored Vesta's own mill, said to have been used by the goddess to teach humanity the art of bread-making. This was spirituality woven into the fabric of everyday life, where the scrape of a broom across a threshold could be as sacred as any temple chant. The festival's decline came abruptly in the 4th century, when Christian Emperor Theodosius extinguished Vesta's eternal flame and disbanded the Vestals. Yet traces of Vestalia linger in unexpected places. The Catholic Church's later devotion to Saint Lucia, who carries bread to the hungry, echoes the Vestal's grain distributions. Modern traditions like baking holiday cookies or sharing communal meals carry whispers of that ancient belief, that nourishment and ritual are inseparable. Even the phrase hearth and home owes its emotional weight to Vesta's legacy, a reminder that some sanctuaries aren't made of marble, but of shared warmth and sustenance. Reimagining Vestalia today isn't about recreating pagan rites. It's about recognizing the sacred in our own domestic rhythms, that morning coffee ritual. It could be a modern mola salsa, a small, deliberate act that grounds the day, the care we put into tidying a shared living space that's tending the hearthfire of connection. In an age of relentless productivity, Vestalia offers a radical alternative. What if the most ordinary acts, baking bread, sweeping floors, lighting candles, were not chores but ceremonies? The goddess might be gone, but the embers of her wisdom still glow. All we have to do is kneel, blow gently, and watch them catch fire again. High in the Andes, when the sun hung at its weakest in the June sky, the stone streets of Cusco thrummed with a desperation modern festivals can scarcely imagine. Inti Raymi wasn't just a celebration, it was a cosmic rescue mission. The Sapa Inca, believed to be the son of the sun god Inti, would stand before his people at the ceremonial heart of the empire, raising golden cups of chicha while priests chanted prayers into the thin mountain air. Their goal, to literally tie down the sun with symbolic chains, preventing its escape as the days grew shorter. This was no metaphor. To the Inca, the solstice marked a precarious moment when the natural order could unravel, and only human intervention, through sacrifice, dance, and meticulously timed rituals, could ensure the sun's return. The ceremony's grandeur was staggering. For 9 days, the city became a living altar. Thousands of participants, draped in vicuña wool and adorned with gold, reenacted creation myths through choreographed processions. Llama blood spilled onto temple stones as offerings, while the air filled with the smoke of sacred plants and the haunting notes of bone flutes. Yet the most dramatic moment came at sunrise on the solstice, when the Sapa Inca would command the sun to halt its retreat, his voice echoing across the plaza as sunlight struck the Torreon's precision-carved windows, illuminating the golden disk at its center. The precision of Inca astronomy still stuns researchers. Their calendar, carved into the landscape itself through carefully aligned monuments, predicted solstices with near-modern accuracy. Spanish chroniclers, horrified by what they saw as idolatry, did more than ban Inti Raymi. They tried to erase its memory. Temples were dismantled to build churches, and the Last Supper Inca, Atahualpa, was executed. But like the sun itself, the festival refused to die. In remote villages, elders kept the old rites alive in secret, disguising them as Christian feast days or weaving solstice symbolism into agricultural rituals. The modern revival, beginning in the 1940s, wasn't mere nostalgia. For Peruvians reclaiming their indigenous heritage, rebuilding Inti Raymi became an act of cultural defiance, a way to stitch severed connections back together. Today's festival, though a theatrical reenactment, pulses with that same urgency. When dancers in feathered headdresses stamp their feet against the ancient stones of Sacsayhuamán, they're not performing for tourists, they're speaking across centuries to their ancestors. The question lingers, how many other Inti Raymis are waiting in the shadows? Across the Americas, fragments of forbidden festivals survive in unexpected places. The Mapuche people of Chile still gather for Huitripantu, their winter solstice celebration marking nature's renewal. In Mexico, Purépecha communities honor the sun god Curacauri with dances older than the Aztec Empire. Even North America holds traces. The Zuni tribe's Xalocco ceremony, with its towering Kachina figures, mirrors Inca solar reverence. These aren't dead traditions, but dormant ones, their embers guarded by elders until the world is ready to listen. Perhaps the greatest lesson of Inti Raymi isn't about the past, but the future. In an age of climate crisis, the Incas' intimate dialogue with celestial cycles feels less like superstition and more like wisdom. They understood what we've forgotten, that human survival depends on humble collaboration with forces beyond our control. When modern Peruvians gather each June to tie down the sun once more, they're not just honoring their history. They're offering a roadmap, a reminder that some chains aren't meant to bind, but to connect. Imagine a packed Athenian theater, the air thick with anticipation, as the playwright Aristophanes unveils his latest comedy, Thesmophoria, a play so audacious it dared to mock one of Athens' most sacred women's festivals. The premise was scandalous. A man disguises himself to infiltrate the Thesmophoria, the secretive rites of Demeter reserved exclusively for women. What unfolds isn't just slapstick humor, but a razor-sharp satire that exposed the fault lines of Athenian society. The women, upon discovering the intruder, put him on trial, parodying the city's legal system while skewering male anxieties about female autonomy. The genius of the play lies in its duality. It's both a celebration of the festival's power and a send-up of the fear it inspired in men who were forever excluded from its mysteries. Aristophanes' comedy reveals something profound about ancient festivals. They weren't static rituals but living conversations. The Thesmophoria's secrecy made it ripe for parody, but the jokes weren't just for laughs. By exaggerating the women's supposed plots like banning tragedies or withholding sex, the play highlighted real tensions. Athenian men depended on women to uphold religious traditions, yet distrusted their collective power. The festival's sacredness didn't shield it from critique. It invited it, proving that even the most revered rituals could withstand scrutiny and even thrive on it. Fast forward to modern times, and the balance between reverence and subversion still dances on a knife's edge. Think of Carnival in Rio or New Orleans, where glittering parades mock politicians and social norms under the guise of celebration. Or consider Dia de los Muertos, where sugar skulls and satirical calavera poems tease the living and the dead alike. These aren't mere rebellions, they're acts of cultural vitality, proving that laughter and critique can coexist with deep respect. Even Christmas, with its solemn carols and irreverent office parties, carries this dual spirit, honoring tradition while poking fun at its excesses. Thesmophoria's legacy isn't just about ancient gender politics. It's a reminder that festivals are mirrors, reflecting society's ideals and insecurities back at itself. When we laugh at our own traditions, whether through satirical floats, cheeky toasts, or even viral memes about holiday chaos, we're participating in a tradition as old as Aristophanes. The health of a culture might just be measured by how boldly it lets its sacred cows be teased, as long as the teasing comes with love. After all, the sharpest satire often springs from the deepest affection, a truth any modern festival goer, raising a glass or wearing a costume, understands in their bones. On a June morning in Rome, when the first light of dawn gilded the rooftops, women gathered at the temple of Mater Matuta with offerings of honey cakes and whispered prayers. This was Matralia, a festival so intimate, so specific in its rituals, that even many Romans of the time might have overlooked its significance. At first glance, the ceremonies seemed simple. Women cradled their sisters' children instead of their own, offering blessings for their nephews and nieces. But then came the jarring moment. A slave woman was ceremonially driven from the temple precincts, her expulsion met with laughter and jeers. Scholars still grapple with this puzzling act. Was it a symbolic rejection of servitude's stain on family bonds, a remnant of some lost myth where Mater Matuta, goddess of the morning light, banished darkness from the hearth? The goddess herself was a paradox, known as the Morning Mother. She presided over both the first light of day and the first light of life, birth and dawn intertwined. Her temple stood in the Forum Boreum, Rome's old cattle market, where the earthy scent of animals mingled with incense. Unlike the grandiose state festivals, Matralia was deeply personal, a day when ordinary women shaped the sacred. They baked cakes in terracotta pans shaped like cradles, the honey symbolizing the sweetness they wished for their families. The act of blessing sisters' children hints at a communal approach to motherhood, where a child's safety wasn't just a private concern but a shared vow among women. That ritual expulsion of the slave woman, though, it's the thread that tugs hardest at modern curiosity. Some historians suggest it mirrored an older Etruscan rite of purification, where the foreign element was cast out to protect the community's purity. Others see a darker subtext, the slave's removal reinforcing social hierarchies even as the goddess celebrated nurturing. But perhaps there's another layer. In a society where enslaved wet nurses often raised patrician children, the gesture might have acknowledged that tension, honoring the complex, often painful web of care that bound women across class lines. Matralia's obscurity today speaks volumes about how history gets written. Grand spectacles like Saturnalia or Lupercalia dominate our imagination, while these quieter, domestic rites fade. Yet their very subtlety reveals deeper truths. Think of the Greek Thesmophoria or the Celtic Imbolc festivals, where women's labor, both physical and spiritual, sustained the rhythms of agrarian life. We've lost countless such traditions, not because they lacked meaning, but because they operated in spaces historians often ignored. The kitchen, the nursery, the pre-dawn hours when women stirred the embers to life. What other small-scale celebrations have slipped through the cracks? The Floralia, where Romans left violets on ancestral graves, the Vestalia's humble milling of grain. Even our modern Mother's Day carries faint echoes of Matralia's honey cakes, though stripped of its sacred heft. These weren't minor footnotes to history, they were the quiet pulse of daily devotion, the rituals that stitched families and communities together when the grand temples fell silent. Mater Matuta's festival reminds us that sometimes the most profound acts of worship weren't about empires or gods, but about the fragile, fierce light of dawn and the hands that tended it. The golden barges of the Opet Festival didn't just sail down the Nile, they traced a celestial map. Recent studies of temple alignments at Karnak reveal something astonishing. The procession's route mirrored the path of Sirius, the brightest star in Egypt's night sky. This was no coincidence. The festival's timing, just before the Nile's annual flood, coincided with Sirius' heliacal rising, its first reappearance after months of invisibility. To the Egyptians, this celestial event wasn't just astronomy, it was divine choreography. The star they called Sopdet heralded the flood's life-giving waters, and by aligning their rituals with its movements, they wove the heavens into their most sacred celebration. But the connections run deeper than a single star. The temple's axis, carefully oriented toward the winter solstice sunrise, transformed the sanctuary into a colossal sundial. During Opet, sunlight would pierce the inner sanctum at precise angles, illuminating statues of Ammon in a calculated play of light and shadow. Even the festival's duration, originally 11 days, later extended to 27, may have reflected lunar cycles or the Nile's flood patterns. This wasn't mere pageantry, it was a sophisticated fusion of hydrology, astronomy, and theology, encoded in ritual. The real mystery lies in what we've yet to decipher. At Luxor, reliefs show priests carrying peculiar palm rib instruments called merkits. Long dismissed as ceremonial objects, some researchers now believe they were precise surveying tools ancient theodolites used to align temples with celestial bodies. If true, the festival's processional route wasn't just symbolic theater, it was a reenactment of cosmic order, measured and maintained by priest astronomers. Across the ancient world, similar secrets whisper to us. The Maya timed their Kayatan ceremonies to Venus cycles, while Stonehenge's stones frame solstice sunrises with mathematical precision. Even Rome's Perilia festival, celebrating the city's founding, aligned with the constellation Taurus, a nod to pastoral roots. These weren't separate threads of science and religion, but a single tapestry. When the priests of Opet guided Ammon's statue along the Nile, they weren't just honoring a god. They were synchronizing human time with cosmic time, grounding their civilization in the rhythms of the universe. What other celestial codes lie buried in festival traditions? Perhaps the bonfires of Beltane marked not just spring's arrival, but the cross-quarter days of an ancient solar calendar. Maybe the torchlit dances of Eleusis mirrored constellations visible only in autumn. Every time we peel back another layer, we're reminded that for our ancestors, the sky wasn't a distant void, it was a living clock, a compass, and a scripture. Its lessons written in light and shadow across their most sacred celebrations. Beneath the cloak of darkness, far from Rome's marble forums and orderly temples, whispers swirled of a celebration that defied every convention. The Bacchanalia wasn't just a festival, it was an open rebellion against the empire's rigid hierarchy, a night when wine flowed like rivers and social norms dissolved into the shadows. By the light of flickering torches, initiates of Dionysus danced with abandon, their movements unrestrained by the usual rules of decorum. Women, typically confined to domestic roles, became priestesses of ecstasy, leading rituals where the lines between mortal and divine blurred. The Senate's horrified edict in 186 BCE, banning the rites on pain of death, claimed the Bacchanalia threatened the moral fabric of Rome. But their real crime, they proved that even the mightiest empire couldn't control the human hunger for transcendence. What made these rites so dangerous wasn't just the wine or the rumors of nocturnal excess. It was their radical inclusivity. Enslaved people and aristocrats knelt side by side, their differences erased by shared devotion to Dionysus, the god who shattered boundaries. The secrecy of the rites held in forests or hidden grottos only amplified their allure. To participate was to step outside society entirely, if only for a night. Modern historians debate how much of the scandal was factual versus political propaganda, but the unearthed Bacchic frescoes in Pompeii tell their own story. Figures lost in rapture, their faces alight with something beyond mere drunkenness. This wasn't debauchery for its own sake. It was a deliberate, ritualized unraveling of the self, an ancient precursor to the transformative experiences seekers still chase today. The Senate's crackdown reveals a paradox at Rome's heart. The same culture that gave us Saturnalia's sanctioned chaos feared the Bacchanalia's untamed spirit. Saturnalia flipped social roles temporarily. Bacchanalia threatened to burn them down entirely. Yet traces of the forbidden rites survived. Dionysus simply migrated, his wild energy resurfacing in Christian wine miracles, Renaissance carnival masquerades, even the ecstatic dances of Sufi mystics. The god of liberation refuses to be caged. Could a modern Bacchanalia exist without descending into mere hedonism? Consider the rise of immersive theater, where audiences become part of the story, or music festivals like Burning Man, where temporary communities experiment with radical self-expression. These aren't perfect parallels, but they share a common thread: the longing to step outside ordinary life, to touch something raw and real. The Bacchanalia's true legacy isn't in the specifics of its rituals, but in its reminder that civilization needs both order and ecstasy. Too much control stifles the soul. Too much chaos destroys the bonds that hold us together. Perhaps the challenge isn't to revive ancient rites verbatim, but to carve out spaces where, like Dionysus himself, we can honor both the light and the dark within us, preferably without getting banished by the Senate. The glow of firelight against Edinburgh's Calton Hill isn't just a spectacle, it's a deliberate act of time travel. Every April 30th, modern-day pagans and curious onlookers gather for the Beltane Fire Festival, a reimagining of the Celtic spring rite that once set hillsides ablaze across Britain. Drummers pound rhythms that feel older than the stones beneath their feet, while costumed performers embody archetypes like the May Queen and the Green Man, their movements channeling fertility and renewal. Yet this isn't some dusty historical reenactment. The organizers openly admit their version is more inspired by tradition than bound to it, blending ancient motifs with contemporary theater. And that's where the debate ignites. Can a festival truly be revived when so much of its original context, the agricultural urgency, the communal fear of failed crops, has evaporated into history? Across the Atlantic, in the sun-baked hills of Greece, a different kind of revival unfolds. Scholars and spiritual seekers have attempted to reconstruct the Eleusinian mysteries, piecing together clues from ancient texts and scattered archaeological finds. Unlike Edinburgh's Beltane, these efforts lean toward meticulous authenticity, with participants fasting, processing along the sacred way, and even brewing kykeon from barley and mint in pursuit of Persephone's sacred brew. But here's the rub: without the original hierophants, those initiated priests who guarded the rites, can any modern ceremony truly unlock what the ancients experienced? The gap between then and now isn't just about missing rituals. It's about the loss of a living lineage, the unbroken thread of whispered knowledge that once made these mysteries transformative rather than theatrical. The tension between creativity and accuracy isn't just academic. When a group in Mexico revived the Aztec festival of Huitzilopochtli, complete with intricate featherwork and traditional dances, indigenous elders raised concerns. Some saw it as cultural appropriation, especially when non-native participants donned sacred regalia without deep understanding. Others celebrated it as reclamation, a way to heal colonial erasure. This dilemma echoes globally. Who gets to decide when a tradition is yours to revive? The answer often hinges on respect. In Iceland, where Asatru followers honor the Norse gods, efforts to reconstruct rituals involve collaborating with historians and local communities, ensuring revivals don't veer into caricature or disrespect. Yet even the messiest revivals serve a vital purpose. They're cultural time capsules, keeping embers of the past alive until future generations might better understand them. When modern Romans celebrate Saturnalia with role reversals and candlelit feasts, they're not just playing dress-up, they're engaging in a conversation with history, asking what these festivals meant and what they could mean now. The bonfires of Beltane may no longer purify cattle, but they still gather people under the stars, forging connections as old as fire itself. Perhaps the ethical question isn't whether we should resurrect these festivals, but how we can do so with humility, acknowledging both what we've lost and what we dare to reimagine. After all, every tradition was once an innovation. The ancient Greeks likely adapted their rites from older Minoan practices, just as Christmas absorbed pagan solstice customs. What makes a festival authentic isn't frozen perfection, but its ability to speak across time, to kindle something in us that the original celebrants would recognize. That spark might look different now, but it still burns, and sometimes that's enough. Festivals weren't just celebrations, they were living libraries, encoded with the technologies and worldviews of their time. Take the niliometers scattered along Egypt's riverbanks, unassuming stone steps etched with measurements, yet vital to the Opet Festival's timing. These weren't mere gauges, they were sacred instruments, their rising waters signaling when to launch Ammon's golden barge. The priests who monitored them weren't just ritualists, they were hydrologists, blending divine duty with precise observation. Every festival like this was a snapshot of a civilization's genius, preserving knowledge that might otherwise have crumbled to dust. Consider the Anthesteria's wine jars, their shapes and residues revealing ancient Greek fermentation techniques, or the Inca's solstice markers at Machu Picchu, where shadow play on stone altars doubled as both ritual and agricultural calendar. These weren't separate science and religion, they were intertwined, each festival a masterclass in how cultures harnessed their environment. Even the wildest revelries held hidden pragmatism. Lupercalia's goat hides, likely sourced from specific breeds prized for their durable pelts. Beltane's bonfire ashes, spread on fields as nutrient-rich fertilizer. What we dismiss as superstition often held kernels of empirical wisdom, passed down through generations in the guise of tradition. The real thrill lies in what we haven't yet uncovered. Recent LIDAR scans in Guatemala revealed hidden causeways linking Maya festival sites, suggesting processional routes far grander than imagined. In Turkey, ground-penetrating radar hints at buried acoustic chambers beneath Dionysian theaters. Could these explain how a single actor's voice reached thousands? Every new discovery peels back another layer, proving these festivals were more than myth and merriment. They were blueprints for living. Their rhythms synced to monsoons, trade winds, and star cycles we're only beginning to decode. Imagine unearthing a Roman program for Saturnalia, detailing which streets hosted which revelries, or cracking the chemical composition of Eleusis' Kykeon, not to replicate it, but to understand its role in altering perception. Even humble artifacts, a child's toy from the Thesmophoria, a broken flute from Inti Raymi, could rewrite narratives about who participated and how. The festivals we think we know are palimpsests, their original meanings waiting to be rediscovered beneath centuries of reinterpretation. What if the next breakthrough isn't in a tomb but a recipe? A festival's true legacy might lie in the mundane, the grain varieties chosen for Vestalia's bread, the metallurgy behind Opet's golden barges. These celebrations weren't escapes from reality. They were reality distilled into its most vivid communal form. And as long as fragments remain buried, so too does the chance to hear, across millennia, the laughter, chants, and whispered prayers of people not so different from us celebrating survival under the same stars. These forgotten festivals aren't just relics of the past, they are mirrors reflecting unchanging truths about what it means to be human. Every civilization, no matter how distant or different, has carved out moments to celebrate light in the darkness, to bind communities together, and to wrestle with life's biggest mysteries through shared ritual. The bonfires of Beltane, the torchlit dances of Eleusis, the riotous role reversals of Saturnalia, they all speak to needs we still feel today. In an age of digital isolation and hurried lives, we might actually need these ancient rhythms more than ever. Take something as simple as gathering around fire. From the Norse Yule logs to the sacred flames of Vesta, fire was more than warmth or light. It was a living symbol of connection. Modern science confirms what our ancestors knew instinctively. Staring into flames lowers blood pressure, and communal singing releases oxytocin. The rituals we've abandoned weren't just whimsy, they were sophisticated social technologies. When the Inca tied down the sun at Inti Raymi, they weren't merely appeasing gods, they were aligning their entire society with natural cycles, creating a visceral reminder that survival depended on collective action. That's wisdom we've misplaced in our climate crisis era, but rediscovery isn't about nostalgia or copying the past verbatim. It's about recognizing patterns. The way modern music festivals create temporary communities echoes Dionysian revels. The mindfulness movement's focus on seasonal living mirrors the agrarian roots of solstice celebrations. Even our secular New Year's resolutions carry faint whispers of Babylonian Zagmuck's cosmic renewal. The magic happens when we consciously weave these threads together, like Japan's Opet Festival, which blends Buddhist ancestor veneration with lantern-lit dancing that would feel familiar to both Celtic and Roman celebrants. The most exciting possibilities emerge at the intersection of ancient and modern. Imagine a winter holiday that honors both Yule's defiance of darkness and Diwali's triumph of light, with solar-powered lanterns and locally sourced feasts. Or a digital age Saturnalia where social media platforms invert their algorithms for a day, prioritizing voices often drowned out. These aren't fantasies, they're invitations. The Aztecs adapted their festivals when their calendar aligned with the Toltecs. Early Christians grafted their stories onto pagan solstices. Adaptation isn't betrayal, it's how traditions stay alive. What we risk in ignoring these lost festivals isn't just historical amnesia, but a flattening of human experience. When we reduce celebration to commercialized routines, we surrender something profound, the chance to mark time meaningfully. The Thesmophoria taught women their labor-sustained civilization. Opet showed even pharaohs were links in a divine chain. These weren't parties, they were lived philosophies. As we sift through their fragments, we're not just uncovering how they celebrated, we're rediscovering how to live. From Zagmuck's cosmic drama to Samhane's ghostly whispers, these ancient festivals were far more than calendar markings. They were living, breathing conversations between humanity and the forces that shaped their existence. Think about it, when Babylonian priests reenacted Marduk's battle with chaos, they weren't just telling a story. They were coding their deepest fears of drought, invasion, societal collapse into ritual, transforming helplessness into collective action. The same impulse drives us today. Our modern New Year's countdowns, with their fireworks and resolutions, are distant echoes of that same yearning to reset, to believe we can outrun time's relentless march. What's astonishing isn't just how these festivals reflected their worlds, but how they continue to reflect ours. the Thesmophoria's focus on women's labor finds new resonance in modern movements reclaiming domestic work as sacred. Lupercalia sanctioned rebellion lives on in protest art and carnival's subversive humor. Even the quietest rituals, grinding grain for Vestalia's bread, offering pomegranate seeds at Anthesteria, speak to a universal truth. That meaning isn't found in grand abstractions, but in the tactile, the communal, the shared turning of seasons. This isn't about nostalgia for a simpler past. Many of these traditions emerged from societies grappling with famine, war, and existential uncertainty, realities we know all too well. Their power lies in how they met those challenges, not with despair but with collective creativity. When the Inca tied down the sun at Inti Raymi, they weren't denying science. They were asserting humanity's role as active participants in the cosmos. In an age of climate crisis, that mindset, one of reciprocal care rather than domination, feels urgently relevant. So how do we honor these traditions without reducing them to costumes or trivia? Start by listening to what still whispers beneath the surface, that Halloween jack-o'-lantern on your porch. It's Samhane's turnip lantern evolved, the warmth you feel sharing a holiday meal, that Saturnalia's egalitarian feast, stripped of its subversive edge but still pulsing with connection. The festivals didn't vanish, they fractalized, their essence surviving in fragments we've yet to fully recognize. Which brings us to the most exciting question: what new festivals might we create? Imagine a modern Zagmuck where communities ritually confront climate chaos through art and action, or a digital age Thesmophoria centering caregiving as sacred labor. The point isn't to replicate the past, but to reclaim its boldness, to remember that humans have always carved out spaces for joy, meaning, and resistance, even in the darkest times. So tell me, when you walk past a Christmas tree or hide eggs in spring, do you ever wonder about the deeper threads tugging at those traditions? Maybe it's time to pull on them. Share your thoughts below, and let's weave these ancient sparks into something new together. After all, the best festivals were never meant to be preserved under glass. They were, and still are, invitations to dance with history while stepping boldly into the